We are diving into the national portion of the real estate exam by breaking down the nuanced differences between subagency and the legal distinctions between a client and a customer. This area of agency law is heavily tested because it dictates the legal and ethical boundaries of every real estate transaction. In the context of the exam, the terms client and principal are used interchangeably. A client is someone who has signed a formal representation agreement with a broker. When you have a client, you are their advocate and fiduciary. This means you must put their interests above all others, including your own. A customer, conversely, is a third party in the transaction. You might provide services to a customer, such as showing them a house or giving them a factual property disclosure, but you do not represent them. The exam will frequently present scenarios where you must decide if a certain action is appropriate based on whether the person is a client or a customer. For example, if a customer tells you they're going through a divorce and need to sell quickly, you are obligated to share that information with your client if it gives your client an advantage in negotiations. However, if that person were your client, disclosing their motivation would be a massive violation of your fiduciary duty of confidentiality. To keep these duties straight, use the mnemonic old car. This stands for obedience to lawful instructions, loyalty to the client best interests, disclosure of all relevant information, confidentiality regarding the client's private motivations or finances, accounting for all funds entrusted to you, and reasonable care and skill in performing your duties. You owe the full old car to your clients. For customers, you only owe the basics of honesty, fair dealing, and the disclosure of material facts. A material fact is anything that might influence a reasonable person's decision to buy or sell, such as a known foundation issue, a leaking roof, or an upcoming zoning change. Note that you never owe a customer confidentiality or loyalty. One of the biggest traps on the national exam involves the concept of subagency. Subagency occurs when one broker, typically the listing broker, appoints another broker to assist in performing tasks for the principal. In this arrangement, the second broker and their agents become subagents of the seller. This means that even though the subagent is working with the buyer, their legal loyalty is actually to the seller. This was the traditional way real estate functioned before buyer agency became common. On the exam, if you see a question where a broker from another firm is helping a buyer, but there is no buyer agency agreement in place, that broker is acting as a subagent for the seller. This is a classic trick wording scenario. You must identify that the subagent owes the seller all the fiduciary duties of old car, and the buyer is merely a customer in that specific scenario. If that subagent learns that the buyer is willing to pay more than the asking price, they must disclose that to the seller, because their primary duty is to the seller bottom line. Another common confusion point is the relationship between a salesperson and their sponsoring broker. On the exam, the salesperson is always a subagent of the broker. When a client signs a contract with a broker, they are technically hiring the firm, not just the individual agent. Therefore, the fiduciary duty flows from the client to the broker and then to the salesperson. This is why you cannot take your listings with you if you switch firms mid-contract, as the listing belongs to the broker. If the exam asks about the creation of agency, remember that a client relationship is usually express, meaning it is written down and clearly stated. A customer relationship can accidentally turn into an implied agency if you start acting like an advocate or giving advice to that customer. This is often tested as a mistake leading to undisclosed dual agency, which is illegal and a common cause for license suspension. You must be careful never to cross the line from providing facts to providing advice when dealing with a customer. Always remember the mental shortcut that you work for a client, but you work with a customer. This simple phrasing helps you identify the proper level of professional distance required when dealing with third parties versus the deep loyalty required for your principals in any exam question scenario.